The African Continental Free Trade Area Business Forum brought together the private sector from across the continent with the sole aim of accelerating the world's largest free trade area, with a potential market of over 1.3 billion and creation of awareness of the current trade and investment opportunities in the area amongst Africa's business community was top on the agenda, and connecting businesses to funding opportunities for after value chains. Secretary General of the Free Trade Area, Mwam Kelemene, is confident that the business community is poised to give further boost to the trade framework.
What's clear is that the private sector in Africa is looking at this very, very carefully. There is still some skepticism, which is normal, that there will be some skeptics about whether or not it is going to happen at the scale at which we want it to happen. But the outcomes of this trade dialogue are very encouraging. The automotive sector, fully engaged and wants to move quickly on the establishment of regional value chains across the African continent. Ghana is doing very well in the auto sector and is a very attractive market. Toyota is there, Nissan is there, Volkswagen is there, South Africa, Kenya. So there is a basis for value chains to be established across the continent. That's one of the outcomes of this trade dialogue that we had. On pharmaceuticals, similarly, there was a strong view that manufacturing of pharmaceuticals should happen in Africa, and that the private sector is being challenged, and big pharma is being challenged to set up production capacity in Africa. So these are the practical steps of implementation of a trade agreement, and we are moving in that direction.
For some experts, it looks good on paper, but there are some bottlenecks that would have to be addressed, at least if not from your side, from amongst the member states ratifying this agreement. And a key concern has got to do with the interpayment system. You say that you're formulating a Pan-African payment system that will solve this challenge of a single currency payment platform for African countries. How are you approaching that issue?
42 currencies on our continent. The cost of currency convertibility is $5 billion a year. We have to do something about that. That's why we, working with AfrXimBank, we have established the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System, so that if you are in Accra, your counterparty is in Nairobi, you don't have to buy the dollar or any other third currency to transact with your counterparty or to pay for the goods that you are exporting, that you are importing. So payments has proven to be a significant constraint to boosting intra-Africa trade because of the cost. That is why the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System is an interim solution. I'm saying interim in the absence of a common currency, which one day I know the African continent will have. You are now going to be able, through the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System, you are now going to be able to trade with your local, your counterparty using local currency. You are on the digital platform. You transact in Ghanaian cedi. Your counterparty in Kenya receives the cedi, the transaction amount in Kenyan shillings. So we are eliminating the need for a correspondent bank in another part of the world to be the middleman.
But don't you concede that if we had a single currency, that would have addressed the challenge? You were speaking about that on Sunday, pointing out some of the challenges and how difficult it will be at this time to implement a single currency regime. What's that big hindrance in the way of many of the member states participating in this free trade area?
There is already a decision, going as far back as the establishment of the Organization of African Unity. There's a very clear decision that Africa must have a common currency. However, getting there is difficult because you have to have macroeconomic convergence. We know from the experience of Europe, Greece, Portugal, when they were experiencing sovereign debt crisis, when they were not able to exercise monetary policy because it is centralized. So you have to get to that point where everybody, all countries in Africa, are on the same macroeconomic policy stance, convergence criteria on, for example, on GDP to debt ratio, on government deficit to GDP ratio. Those things have to be completely aligned. And if they are not, it's impossible to have a common currency. So that's the work that has to be done to get us to that point.
Let's talk about what's happening to many African economies, because the economies, first of all, must fare well in order to trade, fairly with others across the continent. And that's got to do with the sovereign debt crisis that we're witnessing from across the continent. In Accra, where you are, Ghana is heading to the IMF austerity bailout. What's your diagnosis of the African debt crisis, and how do you believe that governments across the continent can effectively tackle the problem?
From the point of view of trade, I think that what we are seeing, the debt distress crisis in some countries, confirms to me that we have to accelerate implementation of the AfCFTA. We have to accelerate elimination of barriers to intra-Africa trade. And that is because when you import goods, you have the ability to increase what is available in the fiscus, because you can, the more goods you have in the market, the higher the percentage of collection of VAT, value-added tax, all things being equal. So when you trade, you are actually stimulating economic activity, which would enable many countries to withstand pressures of that are being presented.
But sorry to cut in, unfortunately, that's not what's happening. We're seeing most of these countries opt for debt bailout and loans. That's been the situation.
But the point I'm making is that it's counterintuitive. It has to be counterintuitive. We are not going to see today as we speak, we are not going to see trade solving the question of debt distress, because it's too soon. We have to have a sustained period of enhanced intra-Africa trade, which contributes to overall economic activity. So it's going to take time. However, we know that this is not the last debt distress crisis that will happen. There will be others. There will be others. We know that from economic history. And so when the other debt crises emerge again in future, where we are trading higher volumes of trade, the revenue from those higher volumes of trade is what will contribute to the fiscus to strengthen the capacity of countries to service their debt, or in fact to even not have to worry about debt serviceability anymore. So it's a long-term approach that we have to take.
And as we wrap up on this conversation, there are more countries that are yet to ratify. What will be your message out there to other African governments in terms of joining hands and ensuring that the continent is indeed trading amongst itself?
Well, the countries that have not yet ratified are Liberia, Benin, Libya, South Sudan, Sudan, but Sudan is under sanctions, and Madagascar. So overall, and Somalia, we are, I think the progress that we've seen is remarkable. 47 countries have ratified the agreement establishing the AfCFTA, the fastest instrument to be ratified in the history of the African Union, and certainly in the, since the OAU, and that is because of political will. So I think that we've moved so quickly, we've come this far in a very short space of time because of political will. So we are on solid ground. The countries that have not yet ratified have not expressed political opposition. What they are saying is that they need time to go through their domestic processes, consult domestic stakeholders, and adhere to their legal prescripts for ratification of international instruments. So we are satisfied with where things stand.
The African Union says the African Continental Free Trade Area forms a pivotal component of its long-term agenda for 2063, which is to boost Africa's economic growth and development and lead to the rapid transformation of the continent.
This is indeed testimony of the strong commitment of the Republic of South Africa in supporting Africa's regional integration agenda. The adoption by the African Union heads of state and government of the theme of the year 2023 as the year of African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, acceleration of the African Continental Free Trade Area implementation is expected to generate greater political momentum, and this business forum has become one of the flagship events contributing to the acceleration of effective implementation of the AfCFTA. As the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area gathers momentum, it's important to allow the Pan-African business community to take ownership of this flagship project. The African Union Commission, the Secretariat of the African Continental Free Trade Area, member states, regional economic communities, development partners have delivered on this flagship project on Agenda 2063, and it is now up to the private sector to start trading. Governments do not trade with each other under the AfCFTA. It is the private sector that does so. A number of instruments have been put before you to start trading under this AfCFTA, and these include the AfCFTA e-tariff book, the Rules of Origin Manual, the African Trade Observatory, the Intra-African Trade Fair, the AfCFTA Adjustment Fund, the AfCFTA Automotive Fund, the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System, PAPS, the AfCFTA Guided Trade Initiative, MANSA, the African Business Council, and the AfCFTA Dispute Settlement Mechanism, among others. All these instruments and tools are designed to ensure that legitimate business transactions thrive. I'm glad that 47 member states have ratified the agreement, and this is a clarion call to the customs authorities to do the necessary.
Through strategic partners such as the Afreximbank, the Free Trade Area Secretariat hopes to eliminate barriers affecting intra-African trade.
It is now time for business. The theme of the forum, Let's Build Africa Together, represents a clarion call we must all respond to as business people gathered here today. AfreximBank is very pleased to be a strong partner of the African Union and the AfCFTA Secretariat in driving the free trade agenda. Notwithstanding many obstacles from within and outside the continent, AfCFTA has remained focused on the continental agenda. We have remained undaunted because we are mindful of the urgency to restore the dignity of the African. We realize that in that journey, your brother or sister can be your worst enemy. We also realize that it is the force of our will, the power of our brain, and the strength of our conviction that can give us the courage to make the difference in the pursuit of prosperity and happiness all of us Africans deserve. With the support of the African Union and the AfCFTA Secretariat, we have taken on the difficult things, those things that the African leaders identified as priorities in 1963, which have remained undone since then. In the same resolution that they passed at the first meeting of the OAU in 1963, calling for the establishment of a continental free trade area, they also set out other related priorities, including, and I will list them, establishing a common external tariff to protect the emergent industries and setting up a raw material price stabilization fund. Developing trade among African countries by the organization and participation in African trade fairs and exhibitions, and by the granting of transport and transit facilities. Establishing an African payments and clearing union, and progressively freeing all national currencies from all non-technical external attachments at the establishment of a Pan-African monetary zone. AfCFTA is pleased that almost after 60 years, it is collaborating with the AfCFTA Secretariat and the African Union Commission, the UN Economic Commission for Africa, and other partners, many of whom are here, to deliver on these aspirations, one after the other. The Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, PAPS, is operational and beginning to serve the countries that have signed on to it, making it possible to pay for intra-African trade, including contracts for building major infrastructure projects in African currencies. Hopefully, in time, it will help reduce our debt burdens in foreign currency. AfCFTA currently supports the system with a $500 million facility to guarantee settlement finality, with the intention to increase this to $3 billion when membership expands from the current 9 countries to the entire continent. Finally, we can begin to save the $5 billion we pay out every year as charges and costs for intra-African payments.
But is the private sector ready to leverage on the African Continental Free Trade Area?
I think we are in a position. I feel like we're underutilizing the capacity and the skills that we do have. I was glad to hear with the lady from MTN and also from Coca-Cola, them saying how it's actually even doable. For example, Coke now just mentioned that, for example, for fruit, simple thing like fruit, instead of getting it from South America and getting it from other China entities in terms of flavor, how we could have it within countries like throughout Africa, and that would be obviously building, like it'll be building our economy, it'll be building our skills, it'll be building so many other industries. Only issues that we have obviously is still infrastructure, which we're still far to go, but we do have the capacity. We just need to just all come together and just, yeah.
And what's your expectation from the business community, the private sector?
Private sector needs to just get on board in terms of support, right? Private sector needs to be more open to support, more open to helping. Like sectors cannot act in thin silos. We need to start working together for a bigger initiative, which is quite possible. For example, there's a suggestion that we could, like as private sector, have a pilot study to see if, for example, we need to travel certain products across even borders, how we can do that by keeping costs minimum. So private sector needs to come on board with that.
Well, in my opinion, the fact that you even have both policy leaders and business people gather here in such numbers, to me is an indication that there is an acceleration somewhere. People are beginning to draw towards the conversation and to understand the importance of what we all seek to achieve. And I think once again we are reiterating the fact that the Africa Continental Free Trade Area implementation is not just limited to policymakers or decision leaders, being the political leaders, but also private sector needs to play a crucial role. So to me, even having a business forum dedicated to private sector involvement is an acceleration.
So going forward, what's your expectation from the private sector?
I think in one of the submissions made, it is clear that policymakers are doing their best. Like the AfCFTA Secretary General mentioned, they are putting in place all the policies, the reforms and everything that needs to be done. It is time for private sector to take charge of the markets, because as we all say, states do not trade with each other. It is private sector that trades. And so if we don't ensure that private sector takes charge of this continental free trade agreement, we are not going anywhere, because they are the ones that needs to understand the importance of this to the continent and then also to the people of Africa at large. So I think at this point the private sector owes Africans a dedication and a commitment to ensuring that this thing works. And by dedication and commitment, I would say owning the process and ensuring that they take advantage of the policies that have been put in place and then start trading.
Our various African governments must make it an intention that you want to empower the indigenous African entrepreneurs, i.e. the indigenous Ghanaian entrepreneurs, so as to be able to give them the enabling environment to compete. Otherwise, I will use cocoa for example. If you open doors and you create policies that protect the multinationals, they have access to capital. They come and buy your cocoa beans cheap, set up the processing in Ghana, export it to themselves, go and create high-value products and bring it back to sell to you. Whilst, on the other hand, you make it almost difficult and impossible for the local Ghanaian entrepreneur who doesn't have